Folks like him, they don't belong behind the wheel of our company trucks. Liability waiting to happen. That bitter voice echoed from the executive suite of Colton Freightways, a place where men in tailored suits made decisions that never touched the lives they ruined. Daniel Colton, the black CEO who had built this empire, sat in that room, silent, because deep down he feared they might be right. He had trusted his managers, believed in the system, but whispers had reached him of black drivers being pushed to impossible limits, fired without cause, discarded like worn-out parts. And then came the name that would haunt him. Anthony Williams, a loyal black driver, fired, dead within a year. Daniel couldn't unhear that, couldn't unsee the pain it had caused. And so he made a choice. No private jet, no motorcade, just an old truck, a back road in Elmswood, Mississippi, and a worn flannel shirt. But what he didn't know was that a chance encounter in a dusty diner would force him to confront the ugliest truth about the empire he thought he had built with pride. And this time he couldn't drive away from it. The engine groaned under Daniel Colton's grip, the worn steering wheel vibrating against his calloused hands. He had chosen this particular rig deliberately, an aging Colton Freightways truck, long retired from frontline service. Its frame rattled with every pothole along the cracked backroads of Elmswood, Mississippi. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was the founder and CEO of one of the South's largest logistics empires, built from nothing but grit and ambition. Yet here he was, bouncing down a forgotten highway in a truck held together by rust and prayers. This wasn't an ego trip. It was survival. Rumors of drivers, especially black drivers, being pushed beyond breaking points had reached his ears. Too many grievances swept under the rug. Too many names like Anthony Williams, reduced to cold lines on a termination report. Daniel needed to see the truth for himself. No cámaras, no entourage, just Daniel now Darius, a supposed rookie driver, out on a rural delivery run no one would question. But as the sun dipped low over cotton fields and pine stands, the truck sputtered, coughed, and died on a lonely stretch of road. Daniel cursed under his breath. Stepping out into the sweltering southern air, he popped the hood, knowing full well he lacked the tools to fix whatever ancient gremlin lurked inside. No signal on his phone, not a soul in sight. Slinging a worn duffel bag over his shoulder, Daniel began walking. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from the heat, but from the growing weight in his chest. He'd built Colton Freightways to give his people opportunity, but somewhere along the line the machine had lost its soul. A flicker of neon caught his eye through the dusk. Elmswood Diner and Motel, paint peeling, sign buzzing faintly. A relic from a bygone era, but tonight it was sanctuary. A bell jingled softly as Daniel pushed open the door. Warm air, thick with the scent of bacon grease and old coffee, enveloped him. Behind the counter stood a black woman in her early 30s, Tasha Williams. Her eyes, tired yet piercing, flicked up at him, the kind of gaze that had learned to expect disappointment and stand anyway. "You lookin' lost, sugar," she said, voice carrying both steel and sweetness. Daniel managed a weary smile. "You could say that. Truck gave out couple miles back. Know anyone who can fix it?" Tasha shook her head. "Closest decent shop's in Jackson, but Mr. Earl might get you rolling by morning. His garage is just off the old highway." Daniel sighed. "Guess I'm stuck here tonight." Tasha gestured toward a faded booth. "Sit yourself down. I'll get you some coffee. You look like you need it." Sliding into the booth, Daniel took in the diner's worn charm. Cracked vinyl seats, faded photos of Elmswood's black history lining the walls, a small memorial corner honoring drivers lost to the road. Tasha returned with a steaming mug and a slice of pie. "On the house," she offered quietly. "You had a day." Grateful, Daniel accepted. Conversation flowed easily between them. He told vague truths about being new to the road, about wanting to understand trucking life. Then Tasha spoke, voice lowering. "My husband used to drive for Colton Freightways, did it proud, till they cut him loose over some mess that wasn't even his fault. Stress ate him alive after that." Daniel's gut twisted. He forced himself to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry. That shouldn't have happened." She shrugged, weary. "Ain't sorry that pays the bills. But I got dreams. Someday I'll open a little place of my own. Not just scrape by." Daniel nodded, her resilience hitting him harder than any boardroom debate ever had. Tonight he thought this wasn't about fixing a truck anymore. It was about something far deeper, and he wasn't sure he'd be ready for what came next. Morning light seeped through thin motel curtains, casting pale stripes across the worn carpet. Daniel Colton woke to the muffled sounds of life stirring beyond the walls. Clinking dishes, faint chatter from the Elmswood diner next door. For a heartbeat he forgot where he was, then memory crashed back. The breakdown, the conversation with Tasha, the story of a man named Anthony Williams who had once driven for his company and died carrying its scars. Daniel dressed quickly, his mind racing. He needed to get that truck fixed, but more than that, he needed to understand the world he'd been blind to for too long. The bell over the diner door jingled softly as he stepped inside. Tasha was behind the counter, pouring coffee with practiced ease. Her eyes flicked up, surprised but welcoming. "Morning. You back on 2 feet?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Barely. Any word on Mr. Earl?" "Should be here soon," Tasha replied, sliding a fresh mug his way. "But don't hold your breath. That old truck's seen better days." Daniel chuckled, though anxiety gnawed beneath the surface. "Thanks. For the pie last night too." Tasha gave a small smile. "We look out for our own around here, even strays from the road." Daniel sipped his coffee, watching her move through the diner, the quiet grace of a woman who had carried too much for too long. A battered pickup rumbled into the lot. Moments later, a tall black man with grease-stained hands entered. "Mr. Earl Jenkins, you the one stuck out on 17? He asked gruffly. Daniel stood. "That's me." Mr. Earl tipped his cap. "Come on then, let's see what we're working with." They crossed the parking lot to the broken-down rig. Earl inspected it with slow, deliberate movements, muttering under his breath, "She'll limp to Jackson if you nurse her, but you ain't hauling no loads anytime soon," he pronounced. Daniel exhaled. "Appreciate it. Just need her running." Earl nodded. "I'll get started." Back in the diner, Daniel returned to his booth. Tasha glanced his way. "Truck's not dead yet, I hear," she said, setting down a plate of eggs and toast. Daniel smiled faintly. "For now, thanks." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "You mentioned your husband drove for Colton Freightways." Tasha's gaze darkened. "He did. 10 years. Never missed a day." She paused, voice tightening. "One run, one load mix-up that wasn't even his fault. They let him go. Just like that." Daniel's stomach twisted. "I'm sorry." Her jaw clenched. "Sorry didn't help when they took our insurance. When folks started looking at him like he wasn't good enough. You know what it does to a man, to a black man who gave everything." Daniel's throat burned. He held her gaze. "It's not right. None of it." Tasha sighed. "Ain't much you can do about it now. He's gone, but I'm still here, trying to keep the lights on." She glanced away, swallowing hard. "I still dream, you know, a little place of my own, not just scraping by for tips." Daniel's heart pounded. This wasn't just a story. This was the human cost of a system he'd built without knowing where its cracks ran deepest. As the morning sun climbed higher, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This detour into Elmswood was no accident. The real work was just beginning. By mid-afternoon, Mr. Earl had worked his magic. The old rig grumbled reluctantly back to life. "You'll get her to Jackson," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But treat her gentle." Daniel thanked him, but his mind was far from the truck. Every word Tasha had spoken still echoed through him. The shame gnawed deeper now. Not just for Anthony Williams, but for every unseen driver trapped in the same cycle. He wandered Elmswood on foot, trying to clear his head. The town spoke volumes. Faded storefronts, shuttered factories, murals honoring black history that stood in quiet contrast to boarded-up homes. Daniel passed a park where children played beneath a weathered sign. Our fathers paved these roads. How many of those fathers had been discarded by his company? When he returned to the diner, the afternoon lull had settled in. Only a few regulars nursed coffee at the counter. Tasha greeted him with a nod. Looks like Mr. Earl worked another miracle. Daniel smiled faintly. Guess I owe him big time. Just then the door swung open. A tall black man with a trucker's build entered. Marcus Taylor, Tasha's older brother. Hey sis. Marcus greeted, voice warm but weary. Tasha smiled. Marcus, this here's Darius. Got stranded on 17 last night. Marcus nodded, sizing Daniel up with guarded eyes. Happens to the best of us. Daniel extended a hand. Good to meet you. Marcus shook it firmly, then slid into the booth across from Daniel as Tasha poured him coffee. Conversation flowed easily at first. Small talk about the road, trucks, weather, but soon Marcus's tone shifted. You drive in for Colton Freightways? He asked. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Just started, learning the ropes. Marcus snorted softly. Well, buckle up. You're in for a ride. His gaze hardened. Look, I've been on that road 15 years. Ain't the driving that's hard. It's the way they treat us, especially brothers like me. Daniel leaned in. What do you mean? Marcus's jaw clenched. Man, you know what I mean. They stack us with the worst loads, routes nobody else wants. You speak up, they mark your file. You so much as blink wrong, one slip, one accident, you gone. Just like my brother-in-law. Daniel's stomach tightened. Anthony, Marcus nodded grimly. He was a damn good driver. Loyal. They hung him out to dry over a paperwork screw-up that wasn't even his fault. Stress killed him before that pink slip did. Silence hung between them. Daniel struggled to steady his voice. I'm sorry. That's not how it should be. Marcus looked him dead in the eye. You say that now, but it's been that way. For a long time, we're numbers to them, not men. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to shout. I built this company to be better. But what good were intentions when the machine he'd created crushed the very people it was meant to uplift? Across the counter, Tasha watched the exchange, quiet but resolute. Marcus drained his coffee. Just remember, man. Out there, you better watch your back. Not everyone's playing fair, especially if you're black. He rose, tipping his cap to Tasha. I'll check on you later, sis. As Marcus left, Daniel sat frozen. His coffee had gone cold, but it was the chill inside him that gripped hardest. Tasha's voice broke the silence. You okay? Daniel looked up, meeting her gaze. I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about what you and Marcus said. It's not right. Tasha sighed. That's the way it is. Doesn't make it fair. But what can you do? Daniel's jaw set. Maybe. There is something I can do. And for the first time in days, the road ahead seemed clearer than any highway, but far more dangerous. Night settled heavy over Elmswood. From his narrow motel bed, Daniel Colton stared at a water-stained ceiling, unable to close his eyes. The words of Marcus haunted him. The pain in Tasha's voice cut deeper than any boardroom attack. You so much as blink wrong, you gone. Just like my brother-in-law. Daniel thought of Anthony Williams, his file, his termination, the quiet line on a report that should have meant nothing, but had cost everything. The shame was unbearable. By dawn, sleep never came, only resolve, a choice that could not wait. The diner buzzed softly with morning prep when Daniel entered. Tasha stood at the counter, slicing vegetables with practiced rhythm. She looked up, surprised by the intensity in his gaze. Morning. You look like you've seen a ghost. Daniel exhaled, steadying himself. Tasha, I need to tell you something. And you deserve the truth. She set the knife down slowly, wiping her hands. All right, I'm listening. Daniel's voice was thick, but clear. My name isn't Darius. It's Daniel Colton. I'm the CEO of Colton Freightways. For a long moment, Tasha simply stared, her eyes unreadable. Then a dry laugh escaped her. You've got to be kidding me. Daniel shook his head. I'm not. I came here to see what life was really like for our drivers. I thought I understood. I didn't. Tasha's hands gripped the counter edge. And what you think telling me this makes it right? That my husband comes back because you had a change of heart? Daniel's chest ached. No, nothing can undo what happened to Anthony. And I can't ask for your forgiveness. But I can promise change. He swallowed hard. I want to offer you a remote role with Colton Freightways. Something stable with real pay. And more than that, I'm going back to my board. We're overhauling driver policies, starting with fair treatment, better support, and transparency. Tasha crossed her arms, eyes blazing. How many times have folks like me heard those promises? From men in suits who disappear when the cameras leave. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. I'm not leaving, and this isn't for show. You've opened my eyes. I owe it to you, and to every driver I failed. The diner fell silent. Finally, Tasha exhaled, voice low. I'll take the job. Lord knows I need it. But don't think for a second this means I trust you. Daniel's shoulders sagged, not from defeat, but from relief. I wouldn't expect you to. I'll earn it. Every day forward. And as the morning sun broke over Elmswood, Daniel knew the hardest road lay ahead. Not the miles back to Atlanta, but the long journey toward justice, trust, and real change. The battered rig groaned beneath Daniel's hands as he guided it out of Elmswood, toward Jackson and then Atlanta. The highway blurred past, but Daniel barely noticed. His mind replayed every word, every look from Tasha, every truth that had seared through the corporate armor he once wore so easily. He'd built Colton Freightways to uplift his people. Somewhere along the way, he had allowed a system to poison that dream. Now he had to tear that system apart. At the Gleaming Glass HQ in Atlanta, Daniel strode through the lobby, polished floors, muted voices. A world untouched by the dust and sweat of the road, but not for long. His assistant, Vanessa Green, looked startled at his disheveled state. Mr. Colton, are you? I'm fine. He cut in, voice firm but calm. Call an emergency board meeting and get me every report we have, driver retention, payroll, grievances. Vanessa blinked, then nodded. Right away, sir. The boardroom was tense. Daniel stood before a wall of skeptical faces, executives who had grown far too comfortable with profits over people. He laid out his plan: increased wages for drivers, transparent grievance system, mandatory bias training, reinvesting profits to improve working conditions, and a new support network for our black drivers and families. The room buzzed with quiet dissent. One board member finally spoke. Daniel, this is ambitious, but the cost. Daniel cut in, voice steel. We've cost our people enough already. If this is too expensive for you, you're free to step down. A heavy silence followed, and slowly, begrudgingly, the tide began to turn. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his office. The first battle was won, but the war for trust had just begun. He picked up the phone, heart pounding. Tasha answered after 2 rings. It's done, Daniel said simply. The board approved the changes, and your offer letter is on its way. Pause. Thank you, Tasha replied quietly. Daniel exhaled. Don't thank me yet. There's still so much to fix. Weeks passed in a whirlwind. Daniel met with drivers face to face. Black, Latino, white. All voices he'd failed to hear before. He listened, took notes, implemented real change. And across the network, a shift began. For the first time, hope stirred among those who had only known hardship. Meanwhile, Tasha began her remote role, hesitant at first, but quickly proving invaluable. Her insights shaped policies Daniel could never have written alone. One crisp afternoon, Vanessa appeared in Daniel's doorway. There's someone here to see you. Before he could answer, Tasha stepped in. She looked out of place amid the polished walls, but her eyes held a quiet strength that no suit could match. Tasha, Daniel greeted, rising. Didn't expect you here. I needed to see it with my own eyes, she said evenly. To know this isn't just words. Daniel smiled faintly. Come, I'll show you everything. For an hour, they moved through the new policies, the feedback systems, the training modules now in place. Tasha asked pointed questions, gave blunt suggestions. By the end, even she looked cautiously impressed. As she rose to leave, Daniel hesitated. "Tasha, thank you for giving me the chance to do right." She studied him, arms crossed. "You're welcome, but I'm not done holding you accountable." Daniel smiled, genuine this time. "I wouldn't want it any other way." As twilight painted Atlanta's skyline, Daniel sat alone once more. The road ahead was long. The wounds ran deep, but for the first time he wasn't running from them. One broken truck, one black family's pain, had become the catalyst for a new chapter. Daniel Colton would never be the same, and neither would Colton Freightways.